Hi everyone, and welcome to another short and sweet video brought to you by Chartmetric. Today we will be going over our new talent search tool, and this tool makes it easy for folks to discover the next big artist according to these 7 key indicators that we had developed. Now, these key indicators are broken up into 2 different types. First, we have performance metrics, which operate on a scale from 1 to 10. And these metrics fall into this performance metrics category because the closer to 10 that you are, the better that the score is. Whereas for these contextual metrics that you see on the right side of our screen, these are open to interpretation. So depending on what you're looking for, a lower score might be better or a higher score might be more appropriate. So I'll be able to explain that a bit further as we get to it. I'm going to break down each of these key indicators one by one, explaining what they mean and how they might be able to help you. And then we can go into some use cases as to how you might be able to benefit from this tool. So first, we have consistent growth. This takes into account how reliably an artist continues to expand their fan base. And we measure this based on looking at the historical performance of the artist on Spotify and on YouTube. And the idea behind this is we want to show a certain level of consistency in terms of audience growth. We don't want to look for artists who have big spikes and big dips in growth. We want to look for consistency over time, so that's a much more reliable indicator that the artist will continue to grow their fan base in the future. Next, we have user engagement, and this looks at engagement metrics on Instagram. More specifically, it's an average of the likes received by the artist within the last 30 Instagram posts divided by the artist's Instagram followers. In a sense, this just explains to you how engaged is an artist's audience on social media, because you could have a lot of followers on social media, but unless you have an active fan base that's engaging with you on a consistent basis, then that's a much better indicator that your artist has a long tail of success in the future. And then finally, we have user curation. This has to do with user curated playlists on Spotify which support the artist in question. So the higher the score, the more user curated playlists are representing the artist. And the reason why this is important is because if a user on Spotify adds your song to a playlist and shares it with their friends, it's indicative of a culture being built behind the artist on Spotify that enables folks to kind of share their music and create a more authentic buzz around any new music that they're putting out on the platform. For these contextual metrics, it's really up to you to determine whether or not a higher score or a lower score is better. And this would depend on what types of artists you're looking for. So I'll break down some examples here. First, we have editorial curation. This has to do with how much editorial playlist support an artist is getting on the Spotify platform. In some cases, you might want to see higher editorial support, which indicates that the artist is consistently streaming well on the platform and they're getting support from Spotify directly. In other cases, you might want to see a lower score. If you're a label looking to sign an artist, for example, you might want to understand that there is room to grow on the Spotify platform, and if you were to sign them, you would be able to increase their streaming numbers by X%. So this is an example of a metric that's kind of up to interpretation. Next, we have trigger cities. Now at Chartmetric, we had developed an analysis which breaks down cities which often act as triggers in terms of seeing an artist grow internationally. So there's an article which breaks down which cities we define as trigger cities, which I will link below. And if your artist appears in a number of these cities, it's a higher indicator that they will then continue to kind of grow and have international success. And along those lines, next we have international development. This looks at how geographically concentrated or varied an artist's top countries are. And then finally, we have audience concentration, which looks at demographic data, most notably age and gender data. So in some cases, you might want to find an artist who has a very concentrated audience. That might be beneficial in a sense where you are looking for an artist that has a very identifiable audience. In other cases, you might want to see a lower score, which would indicate that the artist has reach across age brackets. And that is how you're able to interpret each of these performance and contextual metrics on our new talent search tool. So now, other ways you might be able to take advantage of this tool come into play when you start applying filters. So I'll just take you through a brief example. So let's just say you want to filter for hip hop artists who are based in the US whose first release occurred within the past 2 years. So you're looking at relatively new hip-hop artists based in the US. And to break it down even further, we are filtering by developing, mid-level, and mainstream artists. I'm going to take away the mainstream career stage so that we are only looking at developing and mid-level artists. This means artists who have a pretty substantial fan base, but they haven't exactly broken into the mainstream yet. And lastly, what I will do here is also filter for consistent growth having a score of 6 or higher. This shows me artists who are consistently growing their fan base, who are early on in their career. So based on just a few filters that I just applied, I was able to bring down this list from over 400,000 artists to 216 who fit my exact criteria. Then I can go through and look at each of these artists' data, either by following them on my dashboard or clicking into their artist profile to see if they would be a good fit for my label. And you can compare their consistent growth score to user engagement, to user curation, and our other contextual metrics here, depending on what's important to you, to find artists that fit the exact criteria that you think would be a good fit for your record label, for example. So those are just some of the many use cases that you might be able to take advantage of while using a tool like this. And to conclude, if you're able to interpret these 7 key indicators in a way that makes sense for your organization and filter artists according to certain criteria, it really allows you to fast track your talent search workflow and find artists who will eventually become the next big thing. So I hope you enjoyed this short and sweet video brought to you by Chartmetric.